On this day, in 1886, shortly before 8 a.m. in the morning, Boggo Road Jail was about to play witness to one of its most unusual executions, that of Tim T, or Ty, depending on the source used. In the less than 6 weeks that had transpired between the murder committed by T and his execution, a number of very unique events surrounded the case. T had been sentenced to death over the murder of another Chinese man at Dalbydilla, about 50 kilometres west of Mitchell. It was believed the men had been quarrelling for some days over a gambling debt, so on the night of the 26th of February, T paid a visit to Jimmy R. Fook's residence with the intention of claiming his money once and for all. Armed with a shotgun he'd stolen from another worker, T demanded R. Fook pay up immediately. When the money wasn't forthcoming, T discharged his weapon at close range, peppering R. Fook with over 40 chunks of lead shot. Whilst R. Fook's injuries were ultimately mortal, he managed to survive for a number of hours, naming his attacker as Tim T. Both men were loaded onto a train by the local constabulary in the hope the larger town of Roma could be reached in time where medical attention for R. Fook could be sought. Unfortunately, the wounded man passed away not long after the train had pulled away from the station. A bizarre tale surrounding this train journey was published 50 years later as part of a larger memoir penned by Michael O'Sullivan, the arresting constable in Dalbydilla on the night of the murder, who'd accompanied both suspect and victim in the carriage to Roma, and who, in turn, would eventually work his way up to the position of Deputy Commissioner of Police in Queensland. Despite repeatedly referring to the victim by the name of Hing Kee in his memoir, O'Sullivan claimed that shortly after Jimmy R. Fook's death aboard the train, the lamps in the carriage continued to extinguish themselves inexplicably throughout the night, despite being replaced with the hardiest of units. Rumours allegedly spread rapidly throughout the train's passengers that R. Fook's untimely death had let loose a Chinese devil, which was making its displeasure known. So dire were the supernatural concerns on board the train that even the engine's driver feared for the convoy's well-being. On reaching the town of Mitchell, the failed lamps were removed from the train and locked in the station master's office with a view to collecting them again on the trip back from Roma and experimenting as to their worthiness. On relighting them on the return journey to Dalbydilla through the night, not one lamp appeared to miss a beat, adding further credence to the previous concerns that supernatural powers were already at play in Jimmy R. Fook's murder. Apart from Jimmy R. Fook's verbal statement that he'd been shot by Tim T, the remainder of the evidence used in the trial was completely circumstantial. Needless to say, the evidence given at the trial was enough for the jury to return a verdict of guilty, and the judge passed down a sentence of death. Tim T was subsequently transferred south to Brisbane and thence to Boggo Road Jail to await his execution, and stories emerged of his highly unusual behaviour throughout his very short incarceration. At one stage, it was even reported that T made a habit of lying on the gallows trapdoor whilst exercising in the jail wing, stating that he may as well get used to it. After some failed last-minute attempts via both the Governor and the Executive Council to mitigate his sentence, T was finally executed on the 5th of April 1886. According to the notes entered on his official criminal record after his execution, whilst under sentence of death, the prisoner appeared callous. At first, was understood to admit the crime of which he was convicted, viz. The murder of Jimmy R. Fook at Roma. Subsequently, denied it in a statement forwarded to His Excellency the Governor. Adhered to his denial up to day of death. Was apparently buoyed up with the belief that he wants to be able to return after death and wreak his vengeance on those who had given evidence against him. After being pinioned, he asked for a cigarette, which was given to him. When informed that the moment had arrived for execution, he quickly threw it down and walked onto the scaffold. Death was instantaneous. Of all the executions carried out in both Queensland and Australia, Tim Tees would be one of the few, if not the only, execution before which the prisoner promised to return after death to exact his revenge on those who had played a hand in his conviction and ultimate demise by the hangman.